So, Kira Koto, thank you so much for joining me today for the Researcher's Guide to Digital Tools. If I haven't met you before, my name's Lynn Lavery. I'm the Director of Academic Consulting, and teaching researchers about digital tools is something that I spend a fair bit of my time doing. So, I'm really looking forward to presenting you with a little bit of a guide to navigating the constant overwhelm and change that we seem to be presented with these days. But I would love to start with a quick check-in on a scale of 1 to 10. How overwhelmed do you feel by all the new research technology out there right now? So the endless new apps, AI being added to everything, even just wrapping your head around what AI actually is. So scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you're very, very calm, zen, you're not overwhelmed at all, it's not a problem, through to 10, you're feeling pretty overwhelmed and feel like you can't keep up. So just very simple warm-up task there. Drop me a number in the chat. So 1 is no overwhelm at all, and 10 is you're completely overwhelmed. So just having a look at those numbers. Got quite a few 6s and 7s. Let's just see. Oh, yeah, 7 is a very popular number this morning. Got quite a few 5s too, which is good. Okay. Great. That is super helpful to know. So we're certainly at the high end of the scale there, aren't we? For those that have just connected in, I was just asking folk to drop a number in the chat from 1 to 10 in terms of how overwhelmed you feel right now with digital tools. So 1 being you're not overwhelmed at all, 10 being you're feeling very overwhelmed. And I'm just also, for those that have joined, popping the link to the chat. Yeah. Okay. Great stuff. Thanks, folks. Super, super helpful. We've got one person that's a 1. I'm very impressed. Great to see. Okay. So lots of you were at the high end of that scale, and that is obviously the whole reason you're here today. So I'm getting the sense from a lot of the researchers I work with, they sort of feel like keeping up with research technology and digital tools, it sort of feels like almost a second job, keeping up with it all. And it's actually a job you never applied for. So that can make it quite a big ask. So let me tell you what the session is not, just to be super, super clear about this, because I was clear about it in the webinar description, but a few folk might have misunderstood from the title of the session. So this is not a tool review. So I'm not going to be giving you a list of 10 apps that you absolutely must download by Friday. What I'd like to do instead is give you a way of thinking, something you can take away with you so that the next time a shiny new tool lands in your inbox, you can hopefully decide quite quickly whether it deserves any of your time. So if you joined today hoping I was going to give you a big list of all of the tools that you absolutely must use, that's definitely not what this session is about. Having said that, though, inevitably, I'm going to be sharing a few examples along the way. So while this session is really about a framework or a thinking process you can use when you're navigating this space, I will be mentioning a few apps that are some of my faves as we go through. And I am very happy at the end. I'm hoping to leave lots of time for questions at the end today. I'm really happy to take any specific questions you might have about apps if they're in my area of expertise, of course. A few other sort of upfront comments I wanted to make. A note on language. So you often hear people talk about software, apps, platforms, tools. Sometimes there's differences between them, sometimes not. For the next 45 minutes, I am just going to use the word tools, or I'm going to try and just use the word tools as a bit of a catch-all for all of it. So software like NVivo, the apps on your phone, the web platforms you log into, I'll just refer to all of those as tools. Otherwise, I'm probably going to spend the 45 minutes getting tangled up in language. I also wanted to just say something about where the ideas from today's session have come from. So I've spent years training researchers in tools like NVivo and SPSS. I'm slightly alarmed to think of this. It's been almost 3 decades of teaching researchers how to use those kinds of tools. And I also talk to a lot of experts and other researchers about how they choose and how they use digital tools in their research. So a lot of what follows on my slides today is drawn from watching how people who are really good at this, how they actually decide and navigate this space. As I said before, I will use a few of my own favorite tools as examples, but they are intended just to be examples. It's the thinking about this that I want to leave you with. So by the end, hoping you'll have a handful of questions you can ask about pretty much any tool you might be using, a clearer way to think about the AI side of things, and also hopefully maybe a sense of when to let a tool go, because I think that's sometimes just as important as adding new ones in. So that is my plan for today's session. If anyone has now realised they're in the wrong webinar, by the way, you are more than welcome to exit out. But the last thing I wanted to do today was to give a massive list of tools that you all had to go away and look up. I think that was just going to add to the overwhelm. Okay, so first thing to talk about why keeping up feels impossible right now. If you feel like you're falling behind on all of the different research tools out there, please don't consider that a personal failing. It's actually just the current reality we're in. So there are more research tools out there than one person could ever use. And I think it's really important to recognize here that a lot of the marketing around this is built specifically to make you feel like you're missing out. And I'd love to hear in the chat, folks, if anyone has got that feeling from emails they've received or LinkedIn posts they've noticed. There's that real push around, if you don't use this tool, your life will be all the worse for it kind of messaging. And I think that can be a really dangerous trap to fall into. So do let me know in the chat if you could relate to that particular point. There's hundreds of new apps appearing every week, and I'm not exaggerating there. I was updating some of my note-taking content recently and was looking at some of the new apps that have come out. I genuinely lost count. So the number of tools is, for all practical purposes, infinite. Your time and attention is not. So keeping up with it all isn't a game that you're going to be able to win. And I'd actually love for us all just to drop that as a goal for today. I think a much better aim is to select a small set of tools that genuinely help you, that actually move your research forward, and the confidence to ignore everything else without feeling guilty about it. And just noticing in the chat, that's a great comment from Carolyn. I had an interesting thing happen around this. Just for those that aren't here live, Carol's just popped in the chat in relation to the overwhelm. Even the change of names can be problematic. So mid-July, Notebook LM got changed to Gemini Notebook. Exactly the same app. They just changed the name. It was a branding thing. But when things like that happen, it makes you think that there's either a new tool or maybe there's new stuff in the tool that you're unaware of. And I had an interesting thing happen when I was preparing for today's session. I often will upload my slides just to do a final check. My preferred tool of choice is Claude, and I ran my slides through Claude just to check there were no glaring errors, and it immediately came back and told me I had the wrong name for Notebook LM. And of course, I was right, AI was wrong. We're going to come back to that as a possible issue later today. But yeah, even changes of names can be actually quite overwhelming. Now, just coming back to points on this slide, and thanks for sharing that, Carol. The reason I think you need to be a little bit careful about chasing every single new tool is that it has a real cost. And I'm actually not talking about financial cost here. Every time you switch tools, there's a learning curve, There's the effort of moving your work across to it. There's disruption to habits that you'd probably only just finally got working. And this is something I see a lot, particularly with note-taking apps, actually. So researchers who switch note-taking apps every few months, and that actually becomes a very sophisticated form of procrastination, something you need to be very, very wary of doing. The other thing I commonly see is tools that aren't properly learned or properly implemented. And I think when it comes down to it, a half adopted tool is often worse than not using the tool at all. So, an example here would be people that end up with 3 note taking apps and no actual notes in any of them. So, something I really want to emphasize today is that it's not about knowing every tool that's out there, it's about choosing well, learning well, and saying no often. Right. Now, before we even get into how to choose a tool, I'm going to just pause for a moment on a question that comes up in about every single session that I run along these lines. Do you even need a digital tool at all? And look, the honest answer here is no, not necessarily. If you are the kind of researcher that you think best with pen and a notebook, that's perfect. Or you might do your first round of qualitative analysis with printouts, highlighters, and post-it notes spread out over the floor. That's also completely valid. Some of the best researchers I know work exactly like that. So a good tool is simply one that works for you personally. So please don't leave the session today feeling like you have to digitize everything. Having said that, there are some real advantages to going digital, and it's worth knowing so that you can make the choice here with your eyes open. So, digital notes are a good example. They're obviously very searchable, and as your own collection of notes and ideas build up over the years, that ability to find something in seconds becomes really, really powerful. Digital work is also portable. So, if we take qualitative analysis as an example here, having information analysis in NVivo or Quirkos or MaxQDA or Atlas TI, that can travel with you. It's portable. You can take a look at it no matter where you're working. It's also far easier to back up. A notebook that you leave on the train is potentially gone unless you've got an electronic tag on it. A backed up file isn't. So there are lots of advantages to using digital tools. Worth keeping in mind, there are advantages to pen and paper methods as well. So there's always going to be a bit of a trade-off here. Pen and paper, fully digital, a bit of a mix of the two. The point here is to choose deliberately, and then whatever you choose, stick with it long enough to build systems and a habit. The researchers who struggle most with this are often the ones who keep hopping between systems and tools and never fully settle into any of them. So let's say you've decided a digital tool might help. How do you choose a good one? I'm going to give you a handful of questions to run through here, and the first one is probably the most important. What problem does this tool actually solve for me? Most of us, and I'm going to include myself here because I am just as guilty of this as others, we tend to do it backwards. There's a bit of shiny new toy syndrome going on at the moment. We hear about a new tool, we get a little bit excited, and then we go looking for a reason to use it. Let me know in the chat if you are in the same camp as me, getting excited about some of these new tools that are coming out. And I'm going to suggest today that it's actually quite helpful to flip that around, that you start with a problem that you genuinely have and a problem that you have right now, not one that you might have later down the track, but a problem that you've got with your research today, and then you ask whether a tool might help. Now, it looks clever as you look at one of these shiny new toys. That's not a problem. I can't keep track of my references, or I can't find the notes that I've made. They're problems. Now, I've got an analogy here that I wanted to share that I first came across from Christina Silva. Some of you might be familiar with Christina's work. She heads up the Cactus Networking Project in the UK. They document just about every qualitative software option out there and the pros and cons of each. And she often presents sessions to my research accelerator group, and we were chatting at one of those sessions about how to choose qualitative analysis software. She had a garden shed analogy that I've never forgotten and I absolutely loved. And I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, folks, so apologies to Christina if I don't quite have the detail right. But imagine you're heading out to your garden shed and your task is to mow your lawn. You're not going to reach for a hammer or a handsaw. You're going to hopefully reach for the lawnmower. Now, that sounds almost too obvious when you put it like that, but we make that mistake all the time with our digital tools. We pick the tool first, and then we try and fit it into our workflows or find a task that we can use it for. Christina's point was to make things the other way around. Start with the problem, start with the job you need done, and then match the tool to it. So let's make that real for a moment. If your problem is, I waste hours and hours of my time formatting citations, a reference manager like Zotero or EndNote is absolutely worthwhile. That solves a real problem that you have. But if you don't have that problem, the world's best reference manager is still going to be a waste of your time. If we think about NVivo, which is software that I train people in and I genuinely love, that solves a very specific problem also. It helps you make sense of large amounts of qualitative data. So if you've got 30 interviews to work through, NVivo's a real help. If you've got 3, well, to be perfectly honest, probably a table in Word or a highlighter pen might serve you better there. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here is whether the problem is something that you run into again and again or a one-off annoyance. So tools in there keep on the recurring stuff, something that costs you an hour of your time every single week. If it's a one-off annoyance, you're usually better off just pushing through it. Now, I would love to hear from the group what sort of tasks in your research week genuinely frustrate you. What are you spending what you think might be too much time on, or what are you finding really frustrating? I'd love to pick up a few examples in the chat. So feel free, just take a moment, give me a chance to have a wee pause, but let me know, what do you find frustrating at the moment? I can't guarantee I'll be able to solve it, of course, but I'd be curious to hear. And it might be you have a tool that solves the frustration, so you're welcome to share that as well. So keeping track of ideas, keeping the threads, great stuff. Thank you. Data extraction, yes, that is, I've worked with a couple of researchers over the last couple of weeks that are finding that particularly challenging. It's very, very tiring. What about a few other examples? And of course, keeping in mind with those two examples, yeah, scoping reviews are coming up again. It looks like some of these might be coming to me. Yeah, okay. Fabulous. Yeah. So let's just touch on a few of these. So keeping threads, keeping track of ideas. Some of the note-taking apps are really, really helpful at that. So things like Notion, Obsidian, Evernote, OneNote, they're all good examples. And I'm going to come back to note-taking options a little bit later today because there's some tricks in terms of picking the right one for you. And of course, nothing wrong with pen and paper either if that's what you choose. Scoping reviews, there's some really great software options out there for those. Covidence and Rayanne spring to mind. What I might do, by the way, is I'll include a list of URLs for any of these tools that I am mentioning here. Even though just using reference management software in a really clear, structured way, so Zotero or EndNote can be helpful to a certain extent, not as good as a specialized tool. Analyzing questionnaires. So that may be SPSS or R or one of the other statistical options. Sometimes keeping it simple with something like Excel works well. And increasingly, some of these tools actually often have inbuilt analysis as well. So if you're using something like Qualtrics, for example, that will often have a reasonably simple, admittedly, but a sort of basic set of analysis tools that you can draw on. Okay, thank you for those that shared in the chat. I haven't been able to quite get through all of those, but I will have a wee look after the session in case there's any commonalities. Can't knock the qual researcher out of me. I'm inevitably going to be having a look for themes there. Okay, let's keep going through the slides. And just for those that did miss the slides at the start of the session, I'm just popping a link to those there. So I think there's a second layer to this, and it's one that people often don't think about. And this is me coming back to the note-taking example. So a tool can solve your problem on paper, but still actually be wrong for you. And that's because it actually needs to be a good fit for you personally, the way you think, and also what you value is quite important here as well. Now, in terms of it being a fit for the way you think, this is something that comes up a lot when I teach note taking. And I'm always asked in every note taking session what the perfect note taking app is. There is absolutely no holy grail of note taking apps, folks. So, there's no one perfect tool for everyone. There's definitely no perfect tool sitting out there that will fix all of your information management and note taking woes if only you could find what it is. The right tool is actually one that matches the way that your mind works. So some of you are organizers. You will like boxes and structure. And if that's the case, something like OneNote or Evernote will feel like home. Some of you are builders. You like to design your own system. And if that's the case, something like Notion, which is my note-taking tool of choice. I like to build different views and have a little bit of color. So Notion is great for builders like me. Some of you might think in connections and links, and if that's the case, you'll love a tool like Obsidian and how that works. So none of those tools are better or worse than each other. They're just different fits for different minds and different working styles. Now, I think the values piece is really important here, and I will come back to this when we talk AI later in the session. When something aligns with what you value, it takes far less willpower to use, so it feels natural, almost effortless. When it doesn't, there's no amount of discipline that's going to make it stick. So tools work exactly the same way. If a tool sits comfortably with what you care about, using it will feel really easy. When it doesn't, you'll often feel a really low level friction every time you try and use it, and eventually you'll stop. So it's worth knowing what your values actually are here. Maybe you care a great deal about keeping your data private and under your own control. Maybe simplicity matters more to you than features. Maybe it's the cost. So none of those are right or wrong, but the more honest you are about them, the easier your decisions about tools will become because a lot of the options will actually rule themselves out. Now, I also wanted to talk about what it costs, and I do not mean here the price on the website, although that obviously may well be a factor here. But that's often the smallest cost of choosing a digital tool. The real costs are the quiet ones, and they're often the ones that catch you out. So there is the time to learn it. Every tool is going to have a learning curve, and it's really important that you're honest with yourself about how big that learning curve is, how many hours it might take before you start to learn it. There's also how well it fits with what you already use. So a tool that won't talk to the rest of your setup tends to create more work than save it. There's the ongoing tax of one more subscription, one more account, one more thing to maintain. And then there's also your data, where it lives, who can see it, and whether you can get it back out again. And I think for us as researchers, that data question is not optional. So if you work with participant data, you need to know before anything sensitive goes anywhere near a tool, where is it stored? Does it meet my ethics approval? And can I delete it if I need to? With free tools especially, I would always ask, what is this company getting in return for giving this to me for free? And sometimes the answer is nothing. Sometimes the answer, though, is your data. So you need to know which one it is before you upload, not afterwards. And this is where privacy policies come in. And I know none of us want to waste time reading a privacy policy, but actually it's really, really important that you do. So it's always worth at least a quick look, preferably a more detailed one though, about what a digital tool does with your content, especially anything that you would consider sensitive. So where does your work actually go and who might be able to see it? Couple of quick examples here. Notion, which, as I've just mentioned, I use and I love. It is really wonderful for helping me organize my thinking. But my notes live on their servers, and getting everything back out cleanly does take a little bit of work. Something like Obsidian keeps your notes as plain text files on your machine or markdown files. Neither is right or wrong, but that difference is a genuine cost, and you want to choose it on purpose rather than finding out later. AI transcription's another really good example. Tools like Otter or Descript will save you hours of work on your interviews. That's wonderful. But are you comfortable uploading a confidential interview to that company's servers? Sometimes it's fine. Sometimes your ethics approval will say no. So really important that you ask the questions first. None of this is meant to scare you off using digital tools, of course. It's simply about asking a few questions before you commit. So you've asked what problem it solves. Does it fit you personally? What does it cost? And that leads to a decision, which usually comes down to three options. You adopt it. So it solves a real problem. It fits you personally. The cost is worth it. And now is the right time. So you commit properly, you learn it well, or at least I hope you do. You park it. So that would be you think it's interesting. It might be useful one day, but it's not for right now. Write it on a list and let it go. Or you might decide to completely ignore it. So there's no clear problem, the cost is too high, let it pass, don't feel guilty about it. Now, the one that I would really encourage you to use more than we tend to do is park. So most of the shiny new toys that we're coming across at the moment belong on that list, not in your daily life. I keep a maybe later list myself. So if something catches my eye, but I don't have a use for it just yet, I pop it on the list. That way I'm not letting go of it completely. I can come back to it later if I want to, but to be perfectly honest, most things never come back off that list. Notice as well here, not now is a perfectly valid answer. So it's not indecision, it's not about you being behind, it's you deciding where your attention goes. A brilliant tool at the wrong moment should still be a no. And I've also got a point there that final 6 months of your thesis, just for those of you that are postgrad students here today, that is not the time to either rebuild your entire system or replace your digital tools. I'm always astonished as to how many postgrad students I come across that actually fall into the trap of doing that in the final stages. Right, I have been dancing around AI as we've been talking today, so let's tackle AI on its own for a bit. Everything I've just covered, so problem, fit, cost, what you decide to do about it, applies to AI tools just as much as any other type of tool, but there are a few other things to factor in when you're considering AI. Also, just worth remembering, AI is being bolted on to almost everything right now. So it is worth just being very aware of what within your current toolbox is getting AI functionality added into it. So a few things to say here. wanted to talk about values first, because I think whether to use AI at all can be a values question, not necessarily a practical one. There's the practical side of things and whether it's a good fit for you, but I think your personal values are really important here as well. So some of you will have really real reservations about using AI. And that might be the environmental cost. You might have concerns about the work that these tools were trained on. It might be relating to you just wanting to keep your own thinking and writing sharp rather than outsourcing it. And they are all very, very legitimate positions. Choosing not to use a tool for any of those reasons does not make you a Luddite. And I really want to emphasize that because I think yes, there's a lot of blaming and shaming out there around AI tools. Now, equally, on the other side of this, plenty of these researchers find AI tools genuinely useful. And if you choose to use them thoughtfully, that's just as valid. The point here is to decide on purpose, based on your own values, not choosing a tool because everyone else is and because you feel pressured into it or because you feel you ought to. Second point here, sure you've heard this from many, many people before. Treat AI as a confident assistant, not an authority. It is genuinely brilliant at some things. Summarizing, helping you untangle a messy argument, getting you unstuck on a fiddly technical task. But it will also state completely wrong things with total confidence, and that is worth knowing about and worth just being a little bit concerned about as well. So AI tools happily invent citations. I'm sure most of you have heard the horror stories around that. They look very, very real, right down to the page numbers. There'll be words put inside quotation marks that were never said by the actual person. So just thinking carefully about how you use these tools and treating anything factual that it hands you, consider it unverified until you've checked it against the real thing yourself. Now, where does it genuinely help? Well, when I asked about points of frustration before, there were quite a few of you talked about finding literature. And I think for finding and mapping literature, tools like Elicit, Litmaps, and ResearchRabbit can give you a really useful head start. Gemini Notebook, formerly Notebook LM, as I mentioned before, that's a fabulous tool for summarizing literature. And for those of you that missed my earlier webinar on that, I will include a link to that in the follow-up email that I send today. Now, all of those, though, are just a way in to your literature. They're not a replacement for actually reading the papers properly yourself. I think where we're on slightly safer ground is the more sort of practical, technical, or administrative kind of side of research. So untangling a really cryptic error message, working out an Excel formula, getting you started with R syntax if you're doing quant analysis. So I think they're all reasonably safe uses of it, and it can be genuinely helpful and a real time saver as well. Now, one more thing on my slide here that I wanted to draw your attention to in terms of my main points. Make sure you are aware of your organization's AI policy. This area is moving incredibly fast, and institutions putting rules in place about what can and can't be put into these tools, particularly anything involving participant data or unpublished work, and particularly in relation to anything to do with work that will be assessed. Some universities have approved certain tools, banned others outright. So the last thing you want to do is be breaching your ethics approval because you popped an interview transcript into the wrong tool. Find out your institution's guidance on this, and if you can't find it, ask before you start, not afterwards. I think that's really, really important. If you look for a policy and it's vague, and unfortunately, this is something I'm hearing a lot from researchers around the world, not just New Zealand and Australia. My recommendation here is default to caution. So assume the strictest use of these tools until someone tells you otherwise. Keep anything identifying out of them entirely. So no participant data, no published work, unpublished work that you wouldn't want leaking. And if the policy is unclear and you're asking about it, ask it in writing. So ask your supervisor, your ethics committee, your research office, your graduate research school. And the reason I'm suggesting you get it in writing there is partly so that you can get an answer, but partly so that there's a record that says you checked. Also check each of the tools you're using, their settings. Often paid or institutional versions will let you opt out of your data being used for training, which is really, really helpful to know. And make really good records, folks. So note down what tools you're using, note down decisions you've made and why. And golden rule here is don't put anything into an AI tool that you wouldn't stand to see made public. Just coming back to that point about keeping records, just to really make sure people take that as a takeaway for today. If you are using AI tools in any form, document really, really clearly the use of them. So publishers and university examination committees are increasingly asking for you to make a statement around how you've used AI. It is much easier to record that as you go rather than trying to recall it retrospectively. Obviously, AI is a whole thing. There's lots more I could say here, but in the interest of time, we'll leave that one there. Just this last point down the bottom, because AI tools are getting added into a lot of the regular day-to-day tools that we're using. If you get emails that says we've made a change or we've updated our terms, it's usually worth paying attention to those just in case it is an AI-related functionality that's been added. Okay, we are heading towards the finish time, folks. So be thinking about any final questions that you'd like to ask. And if you did, as I said at the start of today, if you had specific questions about particular types of tools, you are more than welcome to throw them in my direction. But I spent most of the session today talking about choosing tools, but I actually think it's just as important to know when to let go. I think often I see researchers holding on to tools that have stopped serving them a long time ago, and sometimes it's actually just time to move on. So why does that happen? Well, it's the sunk cost trap. So people say to me, I've put so much time into learning this, all my work is in here, I can't possibly switch now. And so they keep using a tool long after it's stopped earning its keep. Now, that past effort is gone either way. The only question that matters is whether it's the right tool from this point forwards. So a simple test here for you. If you were choosing today, knowing everything you know now, would you pick that tool again? And if the answer is a clear no, you've got your answer. Other signs are easy to spot once you look for them. If you quietly dread using a tool, if you've built lots and lots of little workarounds to cope with its annoyances, if something better clearly has come along, or often we keep using a tool out of habit and guilt as well. So they're all really important reasons to be aware of. But, and this is really important, there is the opposite trap, which I mentioned earlier. Constantly switching tools is often just procrastination wearing a very convincing disguise. So set the bar high if you're going to switch tools. Switch when there's a real persistent problem with what you're currently using, not because a shiny new toy has appeared. And factor in the cost of moving. Migrating years of notes or data is very rarely as quick as the marketing will promise. Just an example of that, I mentioned before that I am a very keen Notion user. I used Evernote very heavily prior to that, and the migration from Evernote across to Notion was a very, very long project for me. It actually happened over a period of about 9 months, moving the information I needed from one note-taking app to another. And look, there are always, not always, there are often handy import-export tools you can use. And when I first looked into switching from Evernote to Notion, I saw the marketing, I saw that it was an easy switch, but actually the structure between the two wasn't quite the same. And of course, I'd been using Evernote for I think about 10 years, and a lot of stuff had built in up in my account that I really didn't need. So it was actually a really useful opportunity for a bit of a clear out. So do factor in the cost of moving. Sometimes it's worth it. It certainly was for me. I absolutely adore using Notion now. And actually, I was already using it for different aspects of my business. So it just meant I consolidated everything into one tool. But there sometimes is going to be a cost in terms of time and effort. Few little habits to keep all of this in check here. Do give yourself a review window. So, as these shiny new toys arrive in your inbox, maybe make a point of checking them out just once a quarter or once every 6 months, not every time one lands in your inbox. You might also like to try a one in, one out rule. So, before you adopt something new, figure out what it replaces. I also highly, highly recommend finding a few people whose judgment you trust and let them filter the fire hose of information for you. I find that a really, really useful strategy. I use AI a lot for the day-to-day operations for my business, and there's some really key people I follow on YouTube and Substack. I only pay attention to what they have to say because if I look more widely than that, I'm going to get really, really overwhelmed by the onslaught of information that's out there. Coming back to digital tools and AI for research purposes, signing up to the Academic Consulting mailing list, which I know a number of you are on. So that's the mailing list for my business. We see it as a bit of a customer or community service to be pointing people in the direction of reliable tools. So that's a great way to get information. Following me on LinkedIn, likewise. And I mentioned Christina Silver before. If any of you are in the qualitative research space, her stuff is incredibly sensible in terms of navigating qualitative AI. And I'd highly recommend. She's got a new Substack newsletter and posts regularly on LinkedIn as well. So I will pop links in the follow-up email. And look, they're just a few examples. I'm sure you've all got your own people that you follow regularly that you might rely on for information. Last point that I want to say here, do give anything new you try a fair run before you judge it. So a tool that you've used half of the time for 6 months isn't really being used at all. So you do need to give these tools a really decent try before you call them quits. Okay, how am I going time-wise? So a minute to go. If anyone needs to race off to another meeting, you are more than welcome. Just a quick recap, and then I will take any questions. And I have seen your query there in the chat, Carol, so I will get to that in a moment. So, my recap. Do you even need a tool? What problem does it solve? Does it fit you? And what does it really cost you? Adopt, park, or ignore is a really good strategy when you're considering what to do with the tools you come across. And for the tools that you've already got, if I were choosing today, would I choose this again? And remember, more importantly, you're completely allowed to choose a small set of tools that work for you, ignoring the rest with a clear conscience. Don't feel guilty about it, and let go of anything that's not serving you. Okay. Right, let's deal with any questions. Now, I can see a hand up in the room, so we're not able to take questions verbally today. We're running the session in Zoom webinar format. Please pop your questions. We've got a reasonably small group, so either in the chat or the Q&A is absolutely fine. So if anyone's got a question, don't pop your hand up, put the question in the chat. So Carol's asked if I can type Christina's name in full. This will be in the email that I sent. So that is just in the chat if you're wanting to look her up. Really do recommend her stuff. What about other final questions that people may have? Fire them through to me. Okay, great question there. So, apologies if I'm pronouncing this incorrectly. Actually, I think it was SK was when you introduced yourself earlier today. Planning to use the automatic meeting transcription from Zoom or Microsoft Teams. Not sure if that would violate ethics. So, a couple of things to be aware of there. And often the answer to questions at these kind of sessions is it depends. So it will depend on which university you are from. Think if I'm just looking back, yep, so you were from Massey from um, I don't know Massey's policy off the top of my head, but for most of the New Zealand universities, if you are recording your interviews or focus groups via Zoom or Teams, as long as you are on the university license, that is usually absolutely fine. So if you're using a personal account, that may not meet your ethical obligations, but if you're on a university license for Zoom or Teams, that's usually fine. Please do check that with the ethics committee, though, or your research office, just to be sure. Just a note, though, the quality of the transcripts from either of those is a little bit so-so. You are going to need to allow a decent amount of time to tidy the transcripts up. Unfortunately, it's not quite as good as some of the other tools that are out there. But as a quick first cut, and I would always recommend, even if you are using AI transcription, that you go through quite carefully yourself and check for accuracy. So as a quick check, or a quick first cut, sorry, it's absolutely fine. Um, and I can see SK is using a Massey licensed account. Just double check that. I know for most of the universities I work at regularly, I'm very au fait with their policies, but I haven't looked at the Massey one for a while, so it might just be worth having a wee check, but reasonably sure that will be okay. What about other people? So expecting a few more questions. We have gone just over the 45 minutes, so it might be that people need to head off. But if anyone needs to, and I can see a hand has gone up again. So just a reminder, you'll need to pop questions into the chat or the Q&A panel. And if you don't have any questions, do feel free, if you've got any comments or reflections, please feel free to pop those into the chat. I'd love to hear them. I'm hoping it's given you something to take away and have a bit of a think about. And of course, if you are interested in what digital tools are out there, highly recommend joining our Research Accelerator membership. So we talk digital tools all the time in Research Accelerator. We have videos on digital tools as well. So we've got, I think it's just over 250 hours of video content on a range of different research methods and digital tools, things like Zotero, Notion, Evernote, EndNote, NVivo, SPSS, those kinds of things. Plus, talk about digital tools and which ones we are finding helpful is something that we do regularly as a community. And we also regularly talk about AI, ethics involved, and what's useful and what's not. So if you are interested in talking more about digital tools, the Research Accelerator membership would be a great place to learn more. But I'm not seeing any other questions come in. I will hang around for a few minutes just in case anyone wants to grab me. Thank you once again for understanding about the change of date, everyone. Sorry to those that it meant that you weren't able to attend live. My apologies. But you will have got a much better session out of me today in a serviceable workspace than if I'd tried to present a couple of weeks ago. Good luck with your choice of digital tools. Try and not get sucked into the marketing spiels that try and trap us in. It's a surefire way to feel overwhelmed. Use those questions that we talked about today as a bit of a guide. And remember, if you'd like to learn more, we'd love to see you inside Research Accelerator. Go well, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.